The cold wind cut through everything like a knife. Under the concrete bridge in Montana, a 16-year-old boy pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. His name was Danny, and this old highway overpass had been his home for 3 weeks now. The ground beneath him was hard and frozen. He had tried putting cardboard down, but the wind always blew it away. Now he just sat on the cold concrete, leaning against a concrete pillar that blocked some of the wind. His breath came out in white puffs, and his fingers were so cold they hurt. Danny looked at the one thing that kept him alive during these freezing nights. It was an old military blanket that had belonged to his dad. The green fabric was worn thin in places, and there were small holes here and there. But it still held some warmth. More importantly, it held memories. His father had carried this blanket during his time in the army. When Dad came home, he would wrap young Danny in it during bedtime stories. "This blanket kept me safe overseas," his father would say. "Now it will keep you safe too." That was 8 years ago, before cancer took his father away. After his dad died, Danny moved between different foster homes. Some families were kind, others were not. When he turned 16 last month, the system basically told him he was on his own. No more foster care, no more help. Just a small backpack with his few belongings and that precious blanket. The first week on the streets was the hardest. Danny had never realized how difficult it was to find a simple place to sleep. Parks had security guards who chased him away. Store owners didn't want homeless people near their businesses. The police would tell him to move along, but they never said where he should go. He learned quickly which gas stations threw away food that was still good. The clerk at the Highway Express was nice enough to let Danny use the bathroom and sometimes gave him day-old sandwiches. But most places treated him like he was invisible, or worse, like he was dangerous. Winter in Montana was no joke. The temperatures dropped below freezing almost every night. Danny had seen other homeless people around town, but in the past 2 weeks, he noticed some faces were missing. Word on the street was that 3 people had died from the cold this winter already. The thought scared him, but he didn't know what else to do. The local homeless shelter was always full. Danny had tried going there several times, but they told him the same thing each time. "Sorry, no beds available. Try again tomorrow." Tomorrow always brought the same answer. The waiting list was long, and apparently adults with families got priority over teenagers. Social services was a joke. The one time Danny managed to get an appointment, the tired-looking social worker spent 5 minutes with him. She handed him a list of phone numbers and said, "Try calling these places." But every number either had a waiting list or requirements that Danny couldn't meet. Most wanted an address, which was pretty funny when you thought about it. How could a homeless person give an address? So Danny made the best of his situation under the bridge. He had found a spot where 2 concrete pillars met, creating a small corner that blocked wind from 2 directions. During the day he would walk around town looking for odd jobs or spare change. Sometimes people would give him $1 or 2. Others would lecture him about getting a job, as if it was that simple when you had no address, no phone, and no clean clothes. The nights were the worst part. As darkness fell, the temperature would drop fast. Danny would wrap himself in his father's blanket and try to sleep, but the cold concrete sucked all the warmth from his body. He would curl up in a tight ball, trying to make himself as small as possible to conserve heat. Hunger was a constant companion. Danny had lost weight over the past month. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame. Sometimes his stomach would hurt so much from emptiness that he couldn't sleep. He learned to drink lots of water from public fountains to try to fill the empty feeling. The worst part wasn't even the hunger or cold, though. It was the way people looked at him. Some people stared with pity, which made Danny feel ashamed. Others looked at him with disgust or fear, crossing the street to avoid him. Most people just looked right through him, like he didn't exist at all. Danny often wondered what his father would think if he could see him now. Would he be disappointed? Would he understand that Danny had tried his best, but the system had failed him? Sometimes, late at night, Danny would hold the blanket close and imagine his father's voice telling him everything would be okay. The blanket smelled faintly of his old home, of safety and love. It was the only thing connecting him to a time when he had a family, when he belonged somewhere. As thin and worn as it was, that blanket represented everything Danny had lost and everything he hoped to find again someday. During the coldest nights, Danny would sometimes think about giving up. It would be so easy to just stop fighting, to let the cold take him like it had taken those other 3 people. But then he would remember his father's words about the blanket keeping him safe, and he would pull it tighter and hold on for another day. The town around him carried on with normal life. Cars drove past his bridge every day, full of warm people going to warm homes. Children walked to school with backpacks and lunch money. Adults went to jobs and came home to dinner with their families. Danny watched this normal world from the outside, wondering if he would ever be part of it again. Some nights, kind strangers would stop and offer him food or a few dollars. These moments reminded Danny that good people still existed in the world. A truck driver once gave him a hot cup of coffee and a burger, sitting with him for a few minutes to talk. "I was down on my luck once too, kid," the man had said. Things can change fast both ways. The man's kindness had kept Danny warm inside for days, but those moments were rare. Most of the time, Danny was completely alone with just his thoughts and his father's old blanket. He had learned to treasure the small things. A sunny afternoon that brought a little warmth, finding a $20 bill on the ground, or discovering a restaurant that threw away perfectly good food. As he sat under the bridge that night, Danny pulled the military blanket closer around his shoulders. The wind was picking up again, and the weather report on the gas station radio had mentioned possible snow. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine being somewhere warm and safe. He had no idea that tomorrow would bring an encounter that would change his life forever. He didn't know that his simple act of kindness would set in motion events that seemed impossible. All Danny knew was that he had to make it through another cold night, wrapped in his father's blanket, holding on to hope that somehow things would get better. The concrete was cold against his back, but the blanket held just enough warmth to keep him alive. One more night. He could do one more night. The next morning came with a bitter wind that made Danny's teeth chatter. Snow was starting to fall, just like the weather report had warned. He folded his father's blanket carefully and tucked it into his backpack. Today felt different somehow, though he couldn't explain why. His stomach was growling loud enough that he could hear it over the wind. Danny hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning when he found half a sandwich in the trash behind the diner. He needed to find food soon, or he would get too weak to think straight. The truck stop near the highway was his best bet. Sometimes the drivers would buy him a meal, and the staff there knew him by now. They didn't chase him away like some other places did. Danny pulled his thin jacket tight and started walking through the falling snow. The wind was getting worse as he walked. The snow wasn't the pretty, gentle kind you see in movies. This was the harsh, stinging snow that felt like tiny needles hitting your face. Danny had to squint just to see where he was going. His worn-out sneakers were already soaked through, and his feet felt like blocks of ice. It took him almost an hour to reach the truck stop. By the time he got there, his whole body was shaking from the cold. He pushed through the glass doors and felt the blessed warmth hit his face. The clerk behind the counter looked up and nodded at him. Her name was Betty, and she was one of the few people who treated Danny like a human being. "Rough morning out there," Betty said, shaking her head as she looked out at the snow. "You staying warm enough, honey?" Danny nodded, not trusting his voice yet. His throat was raw from the cold air. He walked over to the coffee machine and poured himself a small cup. Betty pretended not to notice that he didn't pay for it. She had been doing little kindnesses like that for weeks now. The hot coffee felt amazing going down his throat. Danny stood by the window, watching the snow fall harder and harder. The parking lot was already covered in white. A few big trucks were parked outside, their engines running to keep the drivers warm. That's when he saw the car. It was an old sedan, pulled over on the side of the road just past the truck stop. Steam was coming from under the hood, and Danny could see someone moving around near the front of the car. Even through the snow, he could tell whoever it was needed help. Danny looked at his coffee, then at the warm truck stop around him. He really didn't want to go back out into that storm. But something in his gut told him that person might be in real trouble. His father had always taught him to help others when he could, even when it wasn't convenient. "I'll be right back," Danny told Betty, setting down his coffee cup. "Where are you going in this weather?" she asked, looking worried. "Someone's broken down out there," Danny said, pointing toward the road. Betty looked out the window and frowned. "Maybe you should call the police or a tow truck." "I just want to see if they're okay first," Danny said, already heading for the door. The cold hit him like a punch in the face as soon as he stepped outside. The snow was coming down so thick now that he could barely see 20 feet ahead. Danny pulled his jacket hood up and started walking toward the broken-down car. As he got closer, he could see it was a young woman standing by the open hood. She was trying to wave down passing cars, but everyone was driving too fast in the storm to stop. The woman looked scared and desperate. "Hey, you okay?" Danny called out as he approached. The woman turned toward him, and Danny's heart sank. She was shivering so hard she could barely stand. Her lips were blue, and her hands were red and raw from the cold. But what really worried him was the crying he could hear coming from inside the car. "My car broke down," she said through chattering teeth. "My baby is in there, and I can't get the heater to work. I've been trying to get help for over an hour." Danny looked through the car window and saw a tiny baby in a car seat. The infant was crying, and even through the glass, Danny could see the baby's lips were starting to turn blue. This was bad. "Really bad. How long have you been out here?" Danny asked. "Since about 6 this morning," she said. "The car just died, and my phone is dead too. I was trying to get to my sister's house because we don't have heat at our place either." Danny's mind was racing. It was almost noon now. That meant this woman and her baby had been stuck in the freezing car for 6 hours. The baby was showing signs of serious cold exposure. If they didn't get warm soon, things could get very dangerous. "We need to get you both somewhere warm right now," Danny said. "The truck stop is just back there." "I can't leave my car," the woman said. "All our stuff is in here." "Your stuff won't matter if your baby gets hypothermia," Danny said gently. "Come on, let's get him warmed up first." The woman hesitated, then nodded. She opened the car door and started to unbuckle the baby from his car seat. The little boy was crying weakly now, which was actually more scary than loud crying. When babies got too cold, they stopped making noise. As soon as the woman lifted the baby, Danny could see how serious the situation was. The infant was barely responsive. His little face was pale, and his breathing looked shallow. Danny had seen enough medical shows to know this was an emergency. "He's so cold," the woman said, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I've been trying to keep him warm, but I don't have anything thick enough." Without thinking, Danny swung his backpack around and pulled out his father's military blanket. It was the only truly warm thing he owned. It was his lifeline during the freezing nights. It was his last connection to his dad. But looking at that tiny baby, Danny knew what he had to do. "Here," he said, unfolding the blanket. "Wrap him in this." The woman looked at the blanket, then at Danny's thin jacket. "I can't take your blanket. You need it." "The baby needs it more," Danny said firmly. "Please, just take it." Danny wrapped the military blanket around the baby, making sure every inch of the little body was covered. The blanket was big enough to wrap around the infant several times. Almost immediately, the baby's crying got a little stronger, which was a good sign. "We need to get him to the hospital," Danny said. "But first, let's get you both warmed up." Inside, the woman was crying now, but Danny could tell it was relief mixed with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't even know your name." "I'm Danny," he said, supporting her arm as they walked through the snow toward the truck stop. "What's your name?" "I'm Lisa," she said. "And this is my son, Noah?" Danny looked down at the baby, now quiet and bundled in his father's blanket. Something about this moment felt important, like it was going to change everything. He didn't know how right he was. Betty saw them coming through the window and already had her phone out, calling for an ambulance before they even got through the door. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes, but to Danny, it felt like hours. He sat in the truck stop watching Lisa hold her baby boy, who was finally starting to show some color in his cheeks. The military blanket had done its job. Noah was going to be okay. Betty had given Lisa hot coffee and turned up the heat in the truck stop as high as it would go. Other customers were coming and going, but most of them seemed to understand something serious was happening. A few truck drivers had offered to help in any way they could. When the paramedics came through the door, they moved fast. Danny watched them check the baby's temperature and breathing. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, smiled as she examined Noah. "His core temperature is low, but he's responding well," she told Lisa. "You got him warmed up just in time." This blanket probably saved his life. Lisa looked over at Danny, tears in her eyes. "It wasn't my blanket," she said. "This young man gave it to us. He saved my baby." The paramedic looked at Danny with interest. "That was very generous of you, son. This is a really good quality blanket. Military issue, right?" Danny nodded. "It was my dad's." "Well, your dad would be proud," the paramedic said. "You might have saved this little one's life today." As the paramedics prepared to take Lisa and Noah to the hospital, Lisa grabbed Danny's arm. "Please," she said, "give me your phone number or an address where I can reach you. I want to return your blanket when Noah is better." Danny felt his face get hot with embarrassment. "I don't have a phone," he said quietly. "And I don't really have an address either." Lisa looked confused for a moment, then understanding crossed her face. She looked at his worn clothes, his thin jacket, the way he had been sitting in the truck stop like he belonged there. "Where do you live?" she asked gently. "Under the highway bridge mostly," Danny said, looking down at his hands. "It's okay, though. I'm managing fine." The paramedic, who had been listening, stepped closer. "You're homeless?" Danny nodded, feeling ashamed. Here he was, talking to these professional people with their important jobs and their warm homes, and he was just a street kid with nothing. "And you gave away your blanket?" the paramedic asked. "Your only blanket?" "The baby needed it more than me," Danny said simply. Lisa was crying again now. "Oh, honey, I can't take your blanket. You need it to stay warm." "Keep it," Danny said firmly. "Make sure Noah stays healthy. That's more important." The paramedics were ready to load Lisa and Noah into the ambulance. Lisa was still holding the military blanket around her son, but she looked torn about leaving with it. "I'm going to find you," she told Danny. "I promise. I'm going to find you and make this right somehow." Danny smiled at her, though inside he felt empty. "Just take care of your little boy. That's all I want." As the ambulance pulled away, its red lights flashing through the falling snow, Danny felt the full weight of what he had just done. He had given away the one thing that kept him alive during the freezing nights, the one thing that connected him to his father, the one thing that made him feel less alone in the world. Betty came over and put her hand on his shoulder. "That was a beautiful thing you did, honey. But what are you going to do tonight when it gets cold?" Danny shrugged. "I'll figure something out. I always do." But even as he said it, Danny felt scared. The temperature was supposed to drop below 0 tonight. Without his blanket, he might not survive. Still, when he thought about that little baby's blue lips and weak cry, he knew he had made the right choice. "You can stay here for a while," Betty said. "Warm up before you head back out into that storm." Danny was grateful for the kindness, but he knew he couldn't stay too long. Other customers needed the space, and he didn't want to cause problems. For Betty, she had already been nicer to him than she had to be. The snow was still falling hard outside. Through the window, Danny could see that several inches had piled up already. The roads were getting dangerous. Even the big trucks were slowing down and pulling over to wait out the worst of the storm. A few hours later, a news crew showed up at the truck stop. Apparently, someone had called in the story about the baby rescue. The reporter, a woman with perfect hair and a heavy winter coat, started interviewing Betty about what had happened. "We understand a homeless teenager saved the baby's life by giving away his only blanket," the reporter said into her microphone. "Do you know where this young man is now?" Betty glanced over at Danny, who was sitting quietly in the corner with a cup of coffee. He shook his head slightly, and Betty understood. "He left already," Betty told the reporter. "Didn't want any attention for what he did. Said he just did what anyone would do." The reporter looked disappointed. Do you know his name? Anything about him? Just that he's a good kid who did the right thing when it mattered, Betty said. That's all that's important. After the news crew left, Betty came over to Danny. Why didn't you want to talk to them? She asked. Danny thought about it for a moment. I don't know, he said finally. It just felt like the wrong thing to do. Like I was trying to get something out of helping that baby, you know? Betty nodded. You're a special kid, Danny. I hope you know that. As evening came, Danny knew he had to leave the truck stop. The storm had died down a little, but it was getting colder. He needed to find shelter for the night, and he needed to figure out how to survive without his blanket. He thanked Betty for her kindness and stepped back out into the cold. The snow crunched under his feet as he walked toward the highway. Already, he could feel the bitter wind cutting through his thin jacket. Danny found some cardboard behind a closed store and tried to make a shelter under an overpass different from his usual spot. But without his father's blanket, the cold seemed to go right through him. He had never realized how much the blanket had been protecting him as he lay on the frozen ground. Shivering and trying to stay warm, Danny thought about Noah. By now, the baby was probably in a warm hospital room, safe and healthy. The military blanket would be clean and soft around him. That thought made Danny feel a little warmer inside. Even though his body was freezing, he thought about his father too. What would Dad think about giving away the blanket? Danny liked to think his father would understand. The blanket had protected Danny for months, and now it was protecting someone who needed it even more. But as the temperature continued to drop and Danny's shivering got worse, he began to wonder if he had made a mistake. Not about saving the baby, it was definitely right. But maybe he should have found another way. Maybe he should have asked Betty for help getting them both warm blankets. Danny closed his eyes and tried to imagine he was somewhere warm. But all he could feel was the cold concrete beneath him and the bitter wind above. This was going to be the longest, coldest night of his life. He had no idea that miles away, in a warm hospital room, Lisa was already making plans to find him. And he definitely had no idea that her family was about to learn his story. 3 days had passed since the snowstorm, and Lisa sat in the hospital room watching her baby boy sleep peacefully in his crib. Noah was completely healthy now, his cheeks pink and warm. The doctors said he would have no lasting effects from his exposure to the cold. It was a miracle, they said. A few more hours in that frozen car, and the outcome could have been very different. The military blanket was folded neatly on the chair beside her. Lisa had asked the nurses to wash and dry it carefully. She studied every detail of the faded green fabric, the small repairs where someone had sewn up tiny holes, the way the edges were worn soft from years of use. This wasn't just any blanket. This had been treasured by someone. When the social worker came by to check on them, Lisa asked the question that had been bothering her for days. The boy who gave us this blanket, she said. Danny, do you know anything about what happened to him that night? The social worker, a woman named Janet, looked sad. We've been trying to find him since we heard about what he did. The police checked the usual places where homeless youth stay, but the storm was so bad that night. A lot of people had to find emergency shelter wherever they could. Lisa felt her heart sink. So nobody knows if he's okay? We're still looking, Janet said gently. But honestly, with temperatures that low and no proper shelter, it's concerning. That afternoon, Lisa was finally able to take Noah home. But instead of going to her small apartment, she asked her sister to drive her to the truck stop where she had first met Danny. Betty was working behind the counter, and her face lit up when she saw Lisa and the baby. Oh my goodness, look at him, Betty said, coming around the counter to peek at Noah. He looks perfect. How is he doing? The doctors say he's completely fine, Lisa said. Thanks to Danny and this blanket. She held up the carefully folded military blanket. I need to return this to him. Have you seen him? Betty's expression grew worried. I haven't seen him since that day. I've been watching for him, but he hasn't come by. I'm getting concerned, to be honest. He always stops in here at least every other day. Lisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. What if something happened to him? What if he didn't survive that night without his blanket? Let's not think the worst yet, Betty said, though she didn't sound convinced. Maybe he found somewhere warm to stay. Maybe someone else helped him? But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night she called her family to tell them what had happened. She lived on the Crow Nation reservation about 2 hours away from the town where she had broken down. She had been visiting a friend when her car died, when Lisa's grandfather, Robert, heard the story. He was quiet for a long time. Robert was a respected elder in their community, a man who still followed the old ways and understood the importance of honor and debt. "Tell me again about this boy," Robert said. "Tell me exactly what he did." Lisa repeated the story, describing how Danny had given up his only protection against the freezing cold to save a baby he didn't even know, how he had refused to take any credit or attention for his actions, how he had simply disappeared back into the storm, and this blanket belonged to his father? Robert asked. "Yes," Lisa said. "It was military issue. He said it was all he had left of his dad." Robert was quiet again. Lisa's sister, Patricia, could see their grandfather was deeply moved by the story. "Grandfather," Patricia said, "what are you thinking?" "In our tradition," Robert said slowly, "when someone saves a life, especially the life of a child, a debt is created. Not just a personal debt, but a spiritual one. This boy gave up something precious to save Noah's life. That kind of sacrifice creates a bond." Lisa nodded. "I feel that too. I can't just keep his blanket and forget about him. I need to find him and make sure he's okay." "We need to find him," Robert corrected. "This is not just your responsibility anymore. When someone shows such honor, such selflessness, our people have a duty to respond." The next day, Robert called a meeting of the tribal council. He told them Lisa's story, describing Danny's actions in detail. The council members listened in respectful silence as Robert explained the significance of what the young homeless boy had done. "According to our ways," Robert said, "this boy has shown the kind of character that transcends blood. He has shown the heart of a warrior, not in battle, but in compassion. He gave up his most precious possession to save one of our children." One of the younger council members, James, spoke up. "What are you suggesting we do, Elder?" "I'm suggesting we find this boy," Robert said firmly. "And when we do, we honor him properly. We show him that his sacrifice was not ignored or forgotten." The council agreed unanimously. Within hours, word had spread throughout the reservation. Lisa's story was being shared from family to family, and Danny's name was being spoken with respect in every household. Patricia, who worked as a nurse at the reservation clinic, had an idea. "What if we contact the local news stations? They might help us find him. If we can get his story out there, maybe someone will know where he is." Robert nodded approvingly. "Yes, but we must be careful how we tell this story. We don't want to embarrass the boy or make him feel like he's charity. We want to honor him." That evening, Patricia called the same news station that had come to the truck stop 3 days earlier. She explained that they were looking for the homeless teenager who had saved the baby, and that the baby's family wanted to properly thank him. The reporter, Jennifer Walsh, was immediately interested. "We've been trying to find him ourselves," she said. "That story really touched people. We've had dozens of calls asking about the boy. Do you have any new information about him?" "We know his name is Danny," Patricia said, "and we know he usually stays near the truck stop on Highway 89. But no one has seen him since the night of the storm." Jennifer paused. "I have to ask, are you concerned that something might have happened to him? It was a brutal night." Patricia looked at her grandfather, who nodded gravely. "Yes," she said honestly, "we're very concerned. That's why we need to find him as soon as possible." The next morning, Jennifer's news story aired on the local station. It showed footage of the truck stop, an interview with Betty, and Lisa holding Noah wrapped in the military blanket. But the most powerful part was when Robert spoke directly to the camera. "If Danny is out there watching this," Robert said, his weathered face serious but kind, "I want him to know that what he did has not been forgotten. In our tradition, when someone shows such courage and selflessness, they become family. We are looking for you, Danny, not because we pity you, but because we honor you." The story spread quickly. It was picked up by other news stations and shared thousands of times on social media. People all over the state were talking about the homeless boy who gave away his father's blanket to save a baby's life, but despite all the attention, despite all the people looking for him, Danny remained missing. And with each passing day, Lisa's worry grew stronger. She kept the military blanket with her always, waiting for the chance to return it to the boy who had saved her son's life. What she didn't know was that Danny's story had reached far beyond what anyone expected, and that help was coming from a direction none of them could have imagined. The news story about Danny spread like wildfire across social media. Within 24 hours, the video of Robert speaking to the camera had been shared over 50,000 times. People from all over Montana and beyond were commenting, sharing their own stories, and offering to help find the missing teenager. Jennifer Walsh, the reporter who had first covered the story, was amazed by the response. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story aired. News stations from 3 neighboring states wanted to pick up the story. National news outlets were calling to ask for interviews, but it wasn't just the media that was responding. Regular people were getting involved too. A Facebook group called Find Danny the Blanket Hero had grown to over 10,000 members in just 2 days. People were sharing the story, organizing search parties, and putting up missing person flyers all over the state. Tom Anderson, a retired police officer from Billings, had seen the news story and decided to drive down to help look for Danny. He had experience finding missing persons, and something about the story had touched him deeply. "I've got grandkids," Tom told Jennifer when she interviewed him for a follow-up story. "The idea that this kid gave up everything he had to save, a baby, and now he might be in danger himself. I can't just sit at home and do nothing." Tom wasn't alone. Dozens of volunteers were showing up in the area around the truck stop, asking local businesses if they had seen Danny. They checked under bridges, in abandoned buildings, and anywhere else a homeless teenager might try to find shelter. Betty at the truck stop had become an unofficial headquarters for the search. She put up a bulletin board where people could leave contact information and search updates. The wall was covered with photos of Danny that people had gotten from the news footage, along with messages of hope and support. "I never expected anything like this," Betty told one of the volunteers. "Danny is such a quiet, humble kid. He would be amazed to know how many people are looking for him." But despite all the searching, despite all the attention, there was still no sign of Danny. As each day passed without finding him, people began to fear the worst. The night of the storm had been brutal, with temperatures dropping to -15 degrees. Could anyone survive that kind of cold without proper shelter? Lisa was struggling with guilt and worry. She kept Noah wrapped in Danny's military blanket. But instead of bringing her comfort, it was a constant reminder that somewhere out there, the boy who had saved her son might be suffering or worse. "I should have made him come with us to the hospital," she told her sister Patricia for the 100th time. "I should have insisted. You couldn't have known," Patricia said gently. "You were focused on your baby and you were in shock yourself." Danny made his own choice. Robert, Lisa's grandfather, had been organizing his own search efforts. He had contacted tribal police departments across several reservations, asking them to keep an eye out for Danny. He had also been consulting with other tribal elders about the proper way to honor someone who had shown such courage. "Our people have always believed that the spirits guide those who act with pure hearts," Robert told his family. "If Danny is meant to be found, he will be found, but we must continue to look." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A truck driver named Carlos Rodriguez had been following the story on the news. He drove long-haul routes across Montana and had seen many homeless people over the years. Something about the description of Danny sounded familiar, Carlos called the tip line that Jennifer's news station had set up. "I think I might have seen this kid," he told the volunteer who answered the phone. "About a week ago, I was at a rest stop about 40 miles east of where that truck stop is. There was a young guy there, real thin, real quiet. He was trying to stay warm in the bathroom." The volunteer felt her heart race. "Did you talk to him?" "A little bit," Carlos said. "I offered to buy him some food, but he said he wasn't hungry." I could tell he was lying, though. Poor kid looked like he hadn't eaten in days. I bought him a sandwich anyway and left it on the sink counter. What did he look like? Young, maybe 16 or 17, brown hair, about average height but really skinny. He was wearing a thin jacket that looked too big for him. And he seemed really sad, like he had lost something important. The volunteer's hands were shaking as she wrote down the information. When was this exactly? 5 days ago, maybe 6? I remember because it was right after that big storm came through. Within an hour, search teams were heading toward the rest stop Carlos had described. It was a small facility on a less-traveled highway, the kind of place where someone might go if they wanted to avoid being found. Tom Anderson led one of the search teams. They checked the rest stop building first, then began searching the surrounding area. It was Patricia, Lisa's sister, who spotted something that made her heart stop behind the rest stop. Near a line of trees, there was a small shelter made of cardboard and plastic bags. It was barely big enough for one person, and it looked like it had been built hastily. Steam was rising from inside. "Someone's in there," Patricia whispered to Tom. They approached carefully, not wanting to scare whoever was inside. Tom called out softly, "Hello? Is anyone there?" "We're here to help." There was movement inside the makeshift shelter. Then a weak voice said, "Go away, I'm not bothering anyone." Patricia's heart leaped. The voice sounded young and tired. You Danny?" she called out. "We've been looking for you." Silence, then. Who wants to know? "I'm Patricia. My sister Lisa's baby is Noah. Do you remember? You gave him your blanket?" More silence. Then the cardboard moved, and a thin young man peeked out. Patricia gasped when she saw him. Danny looked terrible. His face was gaunt, his eyes were sunken, and his lips were cracked from the cold, but he was alive. "You're Noah's aunt?" Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. "We've been looking everywhere for you. The whole state has been." "Looking for you?" Danny looked confused. "Why?" Tom stepped forward. "Son, you're a hero. What you did for that baby has touched thousands of people. Everyone wants to make sure you're okay." Danny shook his head weakly. "I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Patricia said firmly, "what you did was extraordinary. And we're here to help you now, the way you helped Noah." It took some convincing, but eventually Danny agreed to let them take him to get medical attention. He was severely dehydrated and malnourished. His feet had early signs of frostbite, and his body temperature was dangerously low. As the ambulance drove toward the hospital, Patricia called her grandfather. "We found him," she said, crying with relief. "We found Danny, and he's alive." Robert's voice was thick with emotion. "Bring him home," he said. "Bring him to where he belongs?" Patricia looked at Danny, who was wrapped in warm blankets and finally getting the medical care he needed. She thought about her grandfather's words. Home, maybe. For the first time in a long time, Danny was about to discover what that word really meant, but Danny had no idea what was waiting for him. He had no idea that an entire community was preparing to welcome him, or that his simple act of kindness was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. The news story about Danny spread like wildfire across social media. Within 24 hours, the video of Robert speaking to the camera had been shared over 50,000 times. People from all over Montana and beyond were commenting, sharing their own stories, and offering to help find the missing teenager. Jennifer Walsh, the reporter who had first covered the story, was amazed by the response. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story aired. News stations from 3 neighboring states wanted to pick up the story. National news outlets were calling to ask for interviews, but it wasn't just the media that was responding. Regular people were getting involved too. A Facebook group called Find Danny the Blanket Hero had grown to over 10,000 members in just 2 days. People were sharing the story, organizing search parties, and putting up missing person flyers all over the state. Tom Anderson, a retired police officer from Billings, had seen the news story and decided to drive down to help look for Danny. He had experience finding missing persons, and something about the story had touched him deeply. "I've got grandkids," Tom told Jennifer when she interviewed him for a follow-up story. The idea that this kid gave up everything he had to save. A baby, and now he might be in danger himself. "I can't just sit at home and do nothing." Tom wasn't alone. Dozens of volunteers were showing up in the area around the truck stop, asking local businesses if they had seen Danny. They checked under bridges, in abandoned buildings, and anywhere else a homeless teenager might try to find shelter. Betty at the truck stop had become an unofficial headquarters for the search. She put up a bulletin board where people could leave contact information and search updates. The wall was covered with photos of Danny that people had gotten from the news footage, along with messages of hope and support. "I never expected anything like this," Betty told one of the volunteers. "Danny is such a quiet, humble kid. He would be amazed to know how many people are looking for him." But despite all the searching, despite all the attention, there was still no sign of Danny. As each day passed without finding him, people began to fear the worst. The night of the storm had been brutal, with temperatures dropping to -15 degrees. Could anyone survive that kind of cold without proper shelter? Lisa was struggling with guilt and worry. She kept Noah wrapped in Danny's military blanket. But instead of bringing her comfort, it was a constant reminder that somewhere out there, the boy who had saved her son might be suffering or worse. "I should have made him come with us to the hospital," she told her sister Patricia for the 100th time. "I should have insisted. You couldn't have known," Patricia said gently. "You were focused on your baby, and you were in shock yourself." Danny made his own choice. Robert, Lisa's grandfather, had been organizing his own search efforts. He had contacted tribal police departments across several reservations, asking them to keep an eye out for Danny. He had also been consulting with other tribal elders about the proper way to honor someone who had shown such courage. "Our people have always believed that the spirits guide those who act with pure hearts," Robert told his family. "If Danny is meant to be found, he will be found, but we must continue to look." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A truck driver named Carlos Rodriguez had been following the story on the news. He drove long-haul routes across Montana and had seen many homeless people over the years. Something about the description of Danny sounded familiar, Carlos called the tip line that Jennifer's news station had set up. "I think I might have seen this kid," he told the volunteer who answered the phone. "About a week ago, I was at a rest stop about 40 miles east of where that truck stop is. There was a young guy there, real thin, real quiet. He was trying to stay warm in the bathroom." The volunteer felt her heart race. "Did you talk to him?" "A little bit," Carlos said. "I offered to buy him some food, but he said he wasn't hungry. I could tell he was lying, though. Poor kid looked like he hadn't eaten in days. I bought him a sandwich anyway and left it on the sink counter." "What did he look like?" "Young, maybe 16 or 17, brown hair, about average height but really skinny. He was wearing a thin jacket that looked too big for him. And he seemed really sad, like he had lost something important." The volunteer's hands were shaking as she wrote down the information. "When was this exactly?" 5 days ago, maybe 6. I remember because it was right after that big storm came through." Within an hour, search teams were heading toward the rest stop Carlos had described. It was a small facility on a less traveled highway, the kind of place where someone might go if they wanted to avoid being found. Tom Anderson led one of the search teams. They checked the rest stop building first, then began searching the surrounding area. It was Patricia, Lisa's sister, who spotted something that made her heart stop behind the rest stop. Near a line of trees, there was a small shelter made of cardboard and plastic bags. It was barely big enough for one person, and it looked like it had been built hastily. Steam was rising from inside. "Someone's in there," Patricia whispered to Tom. They approached carefully, not wanting to scare whoever was inside. Tom called out softly, "Hello? Is anyone there?" "We're here to help." There was movement inside the makeshift shelter, then a weak voice said, "Go away. I'm not bothering anyone." Patricia's heart leaped. The voice sounded young and tired. You Danny?" she called out. We've been looking for you. Silence, then. Who wants to know? I'm Patricia. My sister Lisa's baby is Noah. Do you remember? You gave him your blanket? More silence. Then the cardboard moved, and a thin young man peeked out. Patricia gasped when she saw him. Danny looked terrible. His face was gaunt, his eyes were sunken, and his lips were cracked from the cold, but he was alive. You're Noah's aunt? Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. We've been looking everywhere for you. The whole state has been looking for you. Danny looked confused. Why? Tom stepped forward. Son, you're a hero. What you did for that baby has touched thousands of people. Everyone wants to make sure you're okay. Danny shook his head weakly. I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone would do. No, Patricia said. Firmly, what you did was extraordinary. And we're here to help you now, the way you helped Noah. It took some convincing, but eventually Danny agreed to let them take him to get medical attention. He was severely dehydrated and malnourished. His feet had early signs of frostbite, and his body temperature was dangerously low. As the ambulance drove toward the hospital, Patricia called her grandfather. We found him, she said, crying with relief. We found Danny, and he's alive. Robert's voice was thick with emotion. Bring him home, he said. Bring him to where he belongs. Patricia looked at Danny, who was wrapped in warm blankets and finally getting the medical care he needed. She thought about her grandfather's words. Home, maybe. For the first time in a long time, Danny was about to discover what that word really meant. But Danny had no idea what was waiting for him. He had no idea that an entire community was preparing to welcome him, or that his simple act of kindness was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. Danny was released from the hospital the next morning. His body was still weak, but the doctor said he would make a full recovery with proper food and rest. As they wheeled him out to the parking lot, Danny couldn't believe what he saw waiting. For him, there were at least 20 cars and trucks lined up, filled with people from the reservation. Men, women, children, and elderly folks had all come to escort him home. Some were holding signs that said, "Welcome home, Danny," and "Thank you, hero." Others were holding traditional drums and eagle feathers. Robert helped Danny into the front seat of his pickup truck. This is just a small group, Robert said with a smile. More people are waiting at home. As they drove toward the reservation, Danny stared out the window in amazement. Every few miles, they passed more cars parked along the roadside with people waving and holding up signs. Word had spread throughout the native communities across 3 states about Danny's story. People had driven for hours just to be part of welcoming him home. I don't understand, Danny said to Robert. Why are all these people here? I just gave a baby a blanket. Robert was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. In our culture, we believe that the spirits test us sometimes. They put us in situations where we have to choose between our own comfort and doing what's right. Most people fail that test without even realizing they're being tested. Danny listened closely as Robert continued. But you passed the test, Danny. When you gave up your father's blanket to save Noah, you showed the kind of character that our ancestors honored. You showed that you would sacrifice everything for someone else's child, even when you had nothing left to give. As they got closer to the reservation, Danny could see smoke rising in the distance. What's that? He asked. That, Robert said with pride, is the sacred fire. We've kept it burning for 3 days, waiting for you to come home. They pulled into a large field where hundreds of people were gathered. There were traditional teepees set up in a circle, and in the center was a fire with people sitting around it. Danny had never seen anything like it. The whole scene looked like something from a movie, except it was real, and it was all for him. As Robert helped Danny out of the truck, the crowd grew quiet. An elderly woman approached them. She was wearing a beautiful traditional dress decorated with beadwork, and her long gray hair was braided with leather and feathers. Danny, Robert said, this is my mother, Elena. She is one of our most respected elders. Elena looked at Danny with eyes that seemed to see right through him. Then, without warning, she pulled him into a gentle hug. Welcome home, grandson. she said, softly. Danny felt tears starting in his eyes. He couldn't remember the last time someone had called him grandson, or the last time a hug had felt so full of love and acceptance. Elena stepped back and studied his face. You have your father's eyes, she said. He would be proud of the man you've become. You never met my father, Danny said, confused. Elena smiled mysteriously. The spirits tell us things, child. Your father's love lives on in you. That's why you were able to give so freely to others. As the sun began to set, the real ceremony began. Robert explained that what was about to happen was very rare. The tribe was going to perform an adoption ceremony, officially making Danny a member of their nation. But even more than that, they were going to honor him as a warrior. Not a warrior who fights in battle, Robert explained, but a warrior of the heart. Someone who fights for what's right even when it costs them everything. Danny was led to the center of the circle near the sacred fire. The warmth felt good on his face after so many cold nights. Around him, tribal members began to take their places. Some were on horseback, dressed in traditional warrior clothing with painted faces and feathered headdresses. Others sat on blankets. Holding drums and rattles, as the ceremony began, Elena stood and spoke to the crowd in the Crow language. Robert translated quietly for Danny. She is telling everyone your story. About your father? About your time on the streets? About saving Noah? She is asking the spirits to bless you and accept you as one of our own. Then something incredible happened. One by one, warriors began to ride into the circle on horseback. They came from all directions, their horses decorated with traditional paint and feathers. The riders wore full warrior regalia, leather clothing, decorated with beads and shells. War paint on their faces and eagle feathers in their hair. Danny counted 20 riders, then 40, then 60. They kept coming until there were nearly 100 warriors on horseback forming a circle around him. The sight was breathtaking and overwhelming. Danny had never imagined that something like this could be real. Robert stood beside Danny and raised his voice so everyone could hear. Today we honor a young man who showed us what it means to have a warrior's heart. When faced with a choice between keeping what little he had and saving a child's life, he chose love over fear, sacrifice over selfishness. The warriors on horseback began to chant in unison, a deep, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The drummers joined in, creating a heartbeat that Danny could feel in his chest. Elena approached carrying a beautiful blanket, much finer than anything Danny had ever seen. It was made of soft wool and decorated with intricate beadwork in blues, reds, and golds. This is for you, she said, wrapping it around Danny's shoulders. It was made by the women of our tribe. It will keep you warm, but more than that, it will remind you that you are loved and valued. As Elena wrapped the ceremonial blanket around him, Danny felt something shift inside his heart. For so long he had felt worthless, like he didn't matter to anyone. But standing here, surrounded by all these people who had come to honor him, he began to understand his own worth. Robert placed his hand on Danny's shoulder. From this day forward, you are no longer alone. You have a family, a community, and a home. But most importantly, you have people who see the goodness in your heart and want to help that goodness grow. Lisa stepped forward carrying Noah. The baby was awake and alert, looking around at all the people and horses with wide, curious eyes. I want Noah to remember this day, Lisa said. I want him to know about the young man who saved his life and what real courage looks like. As the ceremony continued into the night, Danny was given a traditional name, Giving Heart. Elena explained that this name would remind everyone of his willingness to give even when he had nothing left. The celebration lasted until dawn. There was traditional food, dancing, and storytelling. People came up to Danny throughout the night to shake his hand, hug him, and tell him how much his actions had meant to them. As the first light of morning began to appear on the horizon, Danny realized this was the same time of day when he used to wake up cold and hungry under the bridge. But now, wrapped in his ceremonial blanket and surrounded by his new family, he was watching the sunrise from a completely different world. He was home. 6 months after the ceremony, Danny woke up in his own bedroom for the 100th time, but it still felt like a miracle. Sunlight was streaming through the window of the small house that the tribe had provided for him. It was nothing fancy. Just 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen and a bathroom, but to Danny, it felt like a palace. He stretched and looked around at what had become his world. There were school books on the desk by the window. Robert had enrolled him in classes to help him get his high school diploma. After that, the tribe was going to help pay for college. Danny still couldn't believe that was possible. On the wall hung his father's military blanket, clean and carefully preserved in a frame. Next to it was the ceremonial blanket Elena had given him during the adoption ceremony. Both blankets told the story of his journey, where he had come from and where he belonged now. Danny got dressed and walked to his kitchen. The refrigerator was full of food. Real food that he had bought with money from his part-time job at the tribal youth center. He never took it for granted. Every morning when he opened that refrigerator, he remembered the days when he would have been grateful. For a single piece of bread, a knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, he found Tommy, a 12-year-old boy from the reservation. Tommy had been struggling lately. His parents were having problems, and he was acting out at school. "Hey, Danny," Tommy said, looking at his feet. "My mom said I should come talk to you," Danny smiled. This had become part of his routine. Word had spread throughout the community that Danny was good at talking to kids who were having a hard time. Maybe it was because he understood what it felt like to feel lost and alone. "Come on in," Danny said. "Want some breakfast?" As they sat at Danny's small kitchen table eating pancakes, Tommy slowly opened up about what was bothering him. His parents were fighting all the time, talking about divorce. Tommy was angry and scared, and he didn't know how to handle those feelings. Danny listened carefully, remembering his own anger when his father died, when he moved between foster homes, when he ended up on the streets. "You know what I learned?" Danny said finally. "Being angry doesn't hurt the people who hurt you. It only hurts you." "But it's not fair," Tommy said, tears starting to form in his eyes. "You're right," Danny agreed. "It's not fair. A lot of things in life aren't fair, but you get to choose how you respond to unfair things. You can let them make you bitter and mean, or you can let them make you stronger and kinder." Tommy thought about this for a moment. "Is that what you did? When bad things happened to you?" Danny considered the question. "Not at first. For a long time, I was just angry at the world. But then I met someone who needed help, and helping them helped me too. That's when I learned that the best way to heal your own hurt is to help heal someone else's." After Tommy left, Danny walked to his job at the Tribal Youth Center. The building was new, built with money that had been donated after Danny's story went national. It was a place where kids could come after school to get help with homework, play games, or just have a safe place to hang out. Danny's official title was peer counselor, but really he did whatever needed doing. Some days he helped kids with math homework. Other days he organized basketball games or taught traditional crafts. But mostly he just listened to kids who needed someone to understand them. The best part of his job was working with homeless youth from surrounding areas. The tribal council had decided to open the center to any young person in need, regardless of their background. Danny was uniquely qualified to help kids who were living on the streets because he had been there himself. Just last week, a 15-year-old girl named Beth had come to the center. She had run away from an abusive foster home and was sleeping in an abandoned building. Danny spent hours talking with her, sharing his own story and helping her understand that there were people who wanted to help. Beth was now staying with a foster family that the tribe had carefully vetted. She was back in school and slowly learning to trust adults again. Cases like Beth's reminded Danny why his work was so important. Around noon, Lisa stopped by the center with Noah. The baby was now 10 months old and starting to walk. He was a happy, healthy toddler who loved to explore everything around him. "Look who's learned a new trick," Lisa said, setting Noah down on the floor. Noah immediately started walking toward Danny, his little arms stretched out for balance. When he reached Danny, he grabbed onto his leg and looked up with a huge smile. Hey there, little warrior, Danny said, picking up Noah and spinning him around. The baby giggled with delight. Lisa watched them play together, and her eyes got misty, like they always did when she saw Danny with Noah. I still can't believe how much our lives have changed, she said. Danny knew what she meant. Lisa had finished her nursing degree and now worked at the tribal clinic. She had her own small house on the reservation and was engaged to a good man, who treated Noah like his own son. Her life had stability and hope that she never thought possible. It's funny how things work out, Danny said, bouncing Noah gently. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could be this happy. That evening, Danny attended his weekly dinner at Robert and Elena's house. It had become a tradition that the whole extended family looked forward to. Usually about 15 people showed up: aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends. To Danny, it felt like having the big family he had always dreamed of. After dinner, Robert and Danny sat on the porch watching the sunset. This was their time to talk about important things: Danny's education, his future plans, and the lessons he was learning about life. I got accepted to the university, Danny told Robert, pulling out a letter he had received that day. Robert read the acceptance letter and smiled proudly. This is wonderful news. What do you want to study? Social work, Danny said without hesitation. I want to help kids who are going through what I went through. I want to make sure no one has to face that kind of situation alone. Robert nodded approvingly. Your father would be proud of the man you've become. You took your pain and turned it into purpose. As they sat in comfortable silence, Danny thought about the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he was a homeless teenager with no hope and no future. One act of kindness, giving away his father's blanket to save a baby, had changed everything. But Danny had learned that the real magic wasn't in the dramatic ceremony or the media attention. The real magic was in the daily choice to keep giving, to keep helping others, to keep turning his experiences into opportunities to make the world a little bit better. He still kept his father's military blanket, but now he understood its true purpose. It wasn't just meant to keep him warm. It was meant to teach him about sacrifice, about love, and about the courage to give even when you have nothing left. And on cold nights, when Danny pulled his ceremonial blanket around his shoulders in his warm, safe home, he knew that somewhere out there, other people needed help. Tomorrow, he would wake up ready to give it to them. The homeless boy who gave away his only comfort had found something better than comfort. He had found his purpose.